Herod, Taylor Swift, Spider-Man, and the genealogy of Jesus. What do they have in common? All of them are in our discussion today on Living the Message. Hey, this is Living the Message, where we discuss how the message of Christ might dwell among us richly. I'm Pastor Eric Targe, and I'm here with Senior Pastor of the Moody Church, Philip Miller. Hey, Philip.
Hey, Eric. How are you?
I'm doing well, Philip. I'm excited because we're looking at a text that's going to be interesting to discuss how to live it. Because I feel like this is
the
probably
genealogy,
the genealogy.
Yeah.
It's a text that most people, when they're reading through their Bibles, they skip over, right? Like maybe they look at the first word and the last word. They're like, okay, who are we talking about here? But
Right.
so can you just give us a little bit of background of like why a genealogy? Like why are we looking at a genealogy for Advent?
Yeah, so first of all, it's very common in what was at the time called Greco-Roman bioi, or bios in the singular, but biography, to anchor notable personages when you're writing a biography, to anchor their story, begin their story with their heritage, and to anchor it to the important figures in their ancestry. And so this is in keeping with that, number one. Number two, Matthew is particularly paying attention to how Jesus is the fulfillment of the story of Israel. Yeah. And so he anchors to these three key moments: Abraham, the one who got the promises in the first place, to David, who was the royal figure whose throne stood empty and needed to be reclaimed, and the exile, which was when Israel lost their sovereignty, their national independence, got put under foreign rule. And in a sense, that's still continuing. Even though they're back in the land, they are free to worship in the temple. It's a puppet government that's in place. And so they're really not back from exile. And so the promises of Abraham are unfulfilled. David's throne is empty, and the exile has not been brought to an end. And so and all of that's pointing to something. We need some hero to come and resolve this. And Matthew's whole point is he's setting the table for the advent, the coming of Jesus, who will fulfill all of these great longings in the story of Israel. So that's what's going on in the chapter.
Now, in the text we looked at this past Sunday, Matthew 1, how many generations are actually listed there?
Yeah, so Matthew sets it up with 14 generations between
14 generations.
Abraham and David, 14 from David to the exile, 14 from the exile to Jesus the Christ.
Now, we got a texted in question. Yeah. We always want to remind you that you can always text in. We love to hear from you, and we want to hear your questions. It's easy to do. All you got to do is send a text message to 312-682-1888. It is absolutely free to do so, as long as you have free texting. But here's the question that came in. In the Old Testament, it appears that there are more than 14 generations between Abraham and David, and then to exile. How and why can Matthew say that there are 14 without a charge of misrepresentation? So it seems like maybe in order to get to 14, it looks like Matthew's like, well, we'll just skip that one. Like is that is it misrepresentation, or is there something else going on?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's just say that's true, that Matthew does skip certain links in the chain in order to get to the number of 14 in all three cases, okay? He's skipping in every single one of them. And we know this because when you go back to Chronicles and Ruth and some other places, when you line up the genealogies, if you just stack them up, there are times when he just gives one name and he skips two or three, and then he jumps back in, right? And you go, what's going on? That scares
some people. They think, can I even trust the Bible if Matthew got it wrong?
Sure. Now, so there's two things that I think are important to remember. One is the word begat, which is what we have here, so and such begat, so and such begat. Begat really means became progenitor to. In other words, this person's in the line of this person. It doesn't necessarily mean they are direct DNA child of that person. So, for example, my family found out several years ago that we are sons and daughters of the Revolution, which I didn't even know what that meant. It meant that we have somebody in our heritage that fought in the Revolutionary War here in the United States. Which is
that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is kind of cool.
Cool to know.
I didn't do anything, right? Yeah. But I found out, right? But it's weird to say I'm a son of the revolution when it's been 200 years. I'm more like great, 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 great grandson of the revolution, right? Yeah. And so, but we don't bother to do that. We just say son of the revolution. Okay, so it might be more like that. This person is son of so and such. It just means they're in that line. And I think it was pretty normal in the ancient world to simply say, well, here are the high points. Yeah. So, like, hey, I'm related to Abraham Lincoln. Well, there's a whole bunch of people in between, but the most important thing is I'm related to Abraham Lincoln, and that's not true of me, but I'm just saying as an example, right? And so what Matthew's doing is he's hitting high points along the way, and he's saying these are the key personages in the lineage that we need to pay attention to. And then the question is, why did he try to do 14? Because he's
what's going on there?
He's clearly created these 3 sets of 14, and so
why not do 10 or 5?
Yeah, so I think what's going on there, and most scholars would argue this way, is that the Jewish people love the number 7, right? For 7 days a week, 7 days of creation. Yeah. So what you have here is you have actually 6 sets of 7 generations. So you have 2 7s in the first 14. You have 2 7s in the second 14. 2 7s in the third 14. So you have 6 sets of 7, so it's like 6 days of the week, and then there's what comes after 6, 7, so that with the Sabbath, the day of fulfillment, is coming in Messiah. And so I think there's something like that going on here that he's setting up. There's six sets of 7, and the 7th set of 7 is the Sabbath. It's the day of rest, fulfillment, the coming of the kingdom, the ushering in of all the promises in Messiah. That's going to be the 7th set of 7 that's come. I think it's something like that. There's a little bit of a little strategy to that Jewish people probably would have picked up on in the first century. It's opaque to us, after all these years, but that's probably what he's doing.
Well, that's helpful, because I think what it tells us is that if we look at Matthew and we say, what did he do? It's not that he got it wrong. It's rather that maybe we're reading it wrong. It's not that Matthew was trying to do a perfect genealogy of one after the other. Right. This is an art form. He's trying to communicate something. Yeah,
that's a good way of saying it. And I think we need to recognize we're reading old literature. Yeah. And as such, some of our expectations, like we live in a post-newspaper world where everything can be quoted verbatim. We have recording devices. Everything's date stamped and time stamped, even down to the minute and second on our phones. We know exactly when that photo was taken. It's all geolocated. So there's a whole lot of a different world going on here. It's an oral culture. There's just different literary practices, and we need to give the Bible the benefit of the doubt of being a text that was written in an ancient world that doesn't always play by the rules that we would expect, right? So anyway, so I think that's what Matthew's doing.
Well, that makes sense. Matthew is trying to do all of this. He's trying to paint it in a certain way to make the point that Jesus is the hero that we've been
he's the fulfillment. He's the fulfillment of the whole story of Israel. He's the hero we've been waiting for.
Yeah, I love that you brought that out in your sermon quite a bit, that Jesus is the hero we've been waiting for. So I wanted to ask you a personal question. If I
Okay.
Pastor Philip, who's your favorite superhero?
Oh, man. This is a great question.
You can't say Jesus. Jesus is off limits on this one.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I have a favorite superhero. I did resonate a lot with the last, the whole Marvel franchise and the way Iron Man lays down his life to save the world. Okay. I thought that was really gripping. And it was. So I mean, I don't like
said spoiler alert.
Yeah, I know. It's well, okay. it's been a couple years. It's been a couple years, and
shame on you.
But I don't like. I don't. Much of his character early on is pretty distasteful.
Oh,
but in the end, when he makes the turn, there's some beautiful heroism there that I found pretty compelling.
Yeah, no, I get that. I've always been a Spider-Man guy.
Oh yeah,
myself.
Yep.
Love Spider-Man. Collect the comic books. So good. So I'm curious. Why do you think our culture values superheroes so much? Why do we love superhero stories? I mean, there have been like 20-something of the Marvel movies, and there's like
isn't that fascinating?
30 more coming, and like they
it'll never end. It'll never end.
But like they know that we want it. Yeah, they know that we want it, and we've shown that we want it. Why?
Well, and what's interesting is Stan Lee basically took a lot of the ancient myths and repackaged them in a technological age to create these superheroes. So the stories are old. I mean, they're deeply human, rooted. They're not just a recent phenomenon. They're a human phenomenon. And so, why is that? That's a great question. I think it betrays the fact that deep down, we see the world as a very flawed and broken place that needs help. We know that. We all have a sense of this life was made to be more than it is. Something's gone terribly wrong. And then the question is, what went wrong, and how does it get set right? And I think when you're young, you maybe have a lot of optimism that like this generation can fix it. Yeah. And then you realize how stubborn some of the brokenness in the world is, and you realize, like, I don't know if we can fix this. Yeah. And I think that creates this moment where you just go, wouldn't it be wonderful if someone came in who wasn't part of the brokenness, but who came in and actually delivered us, And I think there's a deep part of the image of God in us that knows that things were made to be good and things have gone terribly wrong, and we're haunted by what we lost. Yeah. Even though we never lived in Eden, we remember it a little bit collectively, and we long to be home. We long for things to be made right, and we know we can't get there on our own. And so I think the hero story speaks to that. Yeah. And of course, Jesus is the true hero. He's the greater hero. He's not just a story. He's the actual flesh and blood, in space and time, historically grounded hero who brings in so much hope. And so it is different, but it is interesting how God sort of pre-wired us to hear that story from the beginning.
And I think in each of us, because that image of God is on us, there's kind of a desire for us to be our own hero, right? Like, we all want to be the hero, and yet we recognize
we try.
We can't be. And so it's funny. We were talking about this before. You heard the story of how Taylor Swift broke Ticketmaster, I think it was. Right? All those people running to it. And so hearing that, I was like, I want to check out her new album just to get an understanding. And she has this song on the album called Antihero. And it's really interesting. I'm just going to read this quick part of it, because I think it kind of speaks to herself of how she feels like, I can't be the hero that I wanted to be and that you wanted me to be. She says, "It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me at tea time. Everybody agrees. I'll stare directly at the sun, but never in the mirror. It must be exhausting, always rooting for the anti-hero." And so she's singing to her fans there, it seems, if I'm reading that right, and saying, I'm not the hero you think. What are we supposed to do when we realize that we're not the hero?
Yeah, well, one of the things I've always admired about Taylor Swift is just her honesty. Like, she, sometimes it's a little brutal, but it's honest. And she, what I think is amazing about this song is she talks about how, all the people I've ghosted have become ghosts in my life. They're haunting me. Yeah. I'm the biggest problem in my own life. I'm the reason my relationships aren't working. I'm the reason, like, I'm like this monster. Yeah. And people know it. I know it. And yet I'm finally owning it, and I'm going to say it out loud. Like, I'm tired and exhausted of this, the worst part of me, which is ruining my life. Like, as much beauty as there is in my life, I'm also my own worst problem. And, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? And and that's a very honest, I think, reflection on our own lives. Like, there's great beauty in all of our lives, and yet we are our own worst enemies, right? Yeah. Like, we have all the right intentions. We want to love people well, and yet we find ourselves being selfish. We commit to, like, we're like, I'm going to use good words, I'm going to encourage people or whatever, and then all of a sudden we're harsh and vindictive, and like, so there's a shadow side. So the whole idea of, like, I think we wake up in the world and we try to be our own hero, we try to write our own story, we try to be, this great thing, and we try to, to whatever extent in life we get some success, we can feel heroic, but there's underneath that an aching, eroding reality of, like, I'm also my own anti-hero. I'm the worst version of myself sometimes. And if the guy in the mirror that's my biggest problem in life. Like, what do I do when I can't be heroic enough? When I'm part of the problem. The problem's not just out there. The problem's in here, inside of me. And I think there's a moment where there's a helplessness, a despair. What do I do when I'm not enough, right? Yeah. And I think that's what she's talking about. And I think that's a very good moment for the gospel to drop in, right?
Yeah.
And realize, like, you can't actually be the hero. You need another hero. You need to be the rescued one. It's not actually your job to rescue you and all of humanity. That the role of Savior has been taken, and His name is Jesus. And look to Him. And so I think there's. I appreciate her lyric because I think it really. It's a very honest appraisal of our own hearts. We can connect with that.
I think our culture, though, responds sometimes differently, right? Like when we realize that we're not going to be the hero, we kind of just give up on the idea of heroes. And it seems like in our culture we have this...
Just get jaded,
Well, yeah,
cynical.
We become jaded, cynical, and we have this celebration now of the anti-hero. I mean, name the television show, the series, like so many of them are now centered on the anti-hero, the bad guy. And you're like, well, we may as well root for him. Or even thinking of all the new Disney movies that are focused on villains.
All the villains,
right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, well, maybe Cruella wasn't that bad. Let's root for her a little bit. And then let's root for Maleficent and all these people. What do you think's going on in our culture that all of a sudden we start rooting for the anti-hero? Like we're doing exactly what she said. Like, don't do. She's like, don't root for me, I'm the anti-hero. And we're like, yeah, let's do it.
Well, so it's interesting. When I was a kid, my parents would show me these old films from early cinema, and there was like a caricature, right? You had the villain was the guy in the black suit with the mustache and the top hat and the cane. He would twirl, you know what I mean?
And he was the penguin.
Right. And it was just like so obviously sinister. He even walked creepy and like and
probably
he was
had
always
a Cockney accent.
I have no, but it was just and the maniacal laugh and all all that stuff. And then you had the hero in the white suit with the gleaming smile and the he'd smile and there'd be like a sparkle off his teeth. You're like,
yes.
Ding, and like, right. And
it was clear.
It was so clear who the good guys and the bad guys were and all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting, like from there, that wasn't really a true caricature. It was a caricature. It wasn't a good, true characterization of good and evil, right? It was very clear in the movie. It made for easy plot lines.
Yeah.
But it wasn't true to reality. Like, we all know that the heroes aren't as pure as that, and we also know that the villains aren't always as completely sinister and far gone. There might be some redeemable goodness in there, right? And so I think this move is acknowledging. You see it in different kinds of films. We're acknowledging that we are more of a marbled being. Like we have beauty and brokenness commingled in our being, and we see heroic elements and anti-heroic elements at once in who we are. And so I think that's a little bit what's going on. Yeah. And there's a little bit of a turn to say, like, well, maybe there's another side to this story. Maybe there is, like, why are these villains acting the way they are? Maybe there's something, maybe that's coming out of pain. Maybe that's coming out of part of their story.
There's something that kind of relates to us, and we can look and say, okay, maybe we're not so bad.
Well, or it's just acknowledging the complexities of it. Yeah. And I think the Bible would speak to that, right? That we are made in the image of God. There's great beauty in us, and we're also fallen and sinful, and we're broken. And those things are marbled in our being. Yeah. And so it's not pure white and pure black. It is a marbled existence. And so I think we're coming to a truer sense of humanity. Yeah. What is interesting, though, you brought up Spider-Man. This latest Spider-Man story is all about how do you redeem the villains. Yeah. Right? And I'm not going to ruin this one too much, but you have we all know, we saw the press release, all the Spider-Men were in it, right? Yep. And here's what's amazing to me. Again, a gospel moment. You've got the 3-in-1 Spider-Man. who in self-sacrifice redeems his enemies. Again, a very gospel story. But again, acknowledging there's even the worst enemies. It's not just, there's a better story than to just destroy them, but to redeem them, right? Yeah. And so I think when we see villainy in ourselves, we long for that redemption. And I think that's what these stories are getting at, that there's, we can connect both with the hero and the villain if we're honest.
So in
long for that redemption. Right?
So in an anti-hero culture, especially when people are so fixated on cheering for the anti-hero, cheering for Cruella or the Green Goblin, whatever it is, right. How do we present the beauty of a real hero well? Because I realize, so this is an evangelism question, right? Because people are so skeptical of real heroes. It's part of our culture. We just don't trust them. You can't be that good. There's no way Jesus can be that good. What would you say to someone who's wanting to...
Yeah. Well, I think we recoil against the kind of heroism, the kind of hero that depicts themselves as, like, oh, I'll save you, it's like this sort of, right? I mean,
just do that one more time. What was that?
No,
what did he say?
But, that's sort of like just, always self-confident, always just shining and what's interesting is Jesus doesn't show up like that.
No.
He doesn't show up as like thin and overly inflated and just this, bravado and like, poor citizens, or whatever, right? Like,
I love that voice. Can you do the rest of the podcast in that
voice? But he comes in just like us, like an average person. Like the question when Jesus was walking the earth was not how can he be human? The question was how can he be God?
Yeah.
He was so obviously human. What was weird was when he tipped his hand and we started to see more than humanity, right?
Yeah.
And because he is gentle and lowly, and he came like us, frail, woundable, nailable, sufferable, crucifiable. There is a deep, there's a deep kind of brokenness to Jesus, not in a sinful way, but he is fragile and he's accessible and he literally can be killed. And that is not how we expect the hero to show up.
No.
That is not how we expect God, when he walks the planet, to work. We would expect him to come in and fly around with a cape and with his big hammer and bring down lightning strikes and if God walks the earth, that's what we would expect. But he's just an average guy, wielding the power of heaven in loving sacrifice for others. And in the end, he crawls into the crosshairs and he takes all of the worst of humanity on himself for us. There is an unexpected nature to Jesus's heroism. And of course, that becomes the reason that he is worthy to be king.
Yeah.
In Philippians chapter 2, he who is like God didn't consider, for being in the very nature of God, didn't consider the form of God something to be grasped, but emptied himself and became like a human nature servant, emptying himself, going to the cross, dying a death on a cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and given him a name that is above every other name.
Yes.
And so the qualifications for Jesus' reign and rule as king are grounded in the cross.
Yeah.
And so you have in Jesus this beautiful heroism and an unexpected humility that I find very attractive. It's not the shiny, overconfident hero that we kind of go, ah. And he's not the villain either that just needs his own redemption. Like he's beautifully humble and beautifully strong all at the same time. And he wins our allegiance through a self-sacrificial love. We bow before him, not because he made us, but because we want to.
Yeah.
And
David Helm,
I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. David Helm put it together so well in his children's storybook Bible that I read to my children at night, where he talks about like Herod wanted to prove himself to be king. And so he counted his people to show like, oh, I'm above all of you people. And Jesus, to show that he was king, became one of his people. And it's a completely different way of doing things, and it seems like it's a hero that you can look and go, oh, yeah, he's one of us.
Yeah, he's
only
one of us.
Better.
He gets us. Only he doesn't fall into the same traps that we fall in.
Yeah.
He doesn't have an anti-hero side.
Yeah.
And therefore, he can be the hero we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we got another text-in question that I want to go to. He said, this is from Ken. So gave us his name. Ken, thanks for texting us in. Ken said, do you think Jesus would be on the throne today had the Israelites accepted Jesus as Messiah 2,000 years ago? And so maybe another way of phrasing this question, and I might be putting words in Ken's mouth, so forgive me, Ken, but would Jesus be a better hero had he been accepted, had he not had to die?
Yeah. So this is a great hypothetical question, right? Like, so Jesus obviously offers the kingdom to Israel. They reject him and they reject his messiahship. And so there's always this, I think, this what if, right? We can always go back and go, what if, what if?
What if the Romans hadn't crucified?
What if what if he had never gone to the cross? What if he had never, what if they had enthroned him? Like, what if Palm Sunday was the end of the story? They march into Jerusalem. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, and he walks right to the throne and sits down. What would life have been like? And I think at one level you'd say, wow, that would be a very different story. The offer of the kingdom to Israel was legitimate, but here's the flip side. I don't think he would have been a better hero because I think there's no, biblically speaking, there's no crown. There's no throne without the cross.
Yeah.
There's no crown without the cross. Jesus is more qualified to rule and reign as king over the universe because he was crucified and slain, right? In Revelation, worthy are you, for you were slain. What a beautiful picture. I mean, anyone can ascend the throne through power, right, and subjugate their enemies. Only Jesus can die for his enemies, rise again, and through the allegiance that has been willingly granted him, rise into authority and power. Like, that's how you win the hearts of the people, And so, of course, all the prophecies, all the stuff in the Old Testament, it wouldn't have worked if he had not gone to the cross. We need the cross. So I think from the eternal plan of God, no, it could never have happened any other way. God's plan involved that rejection. It is a nice little hypothetical to play with, but I think it would be a less beautiful story. Yeah. I think a throne without the cross is a less beautiful story. Yeah. The cross to resurrection, to ascension, to the reclamation of the throne, that is the most beautiful story. Yeah. And that's the story that God's written.
Because of the cross, Jesus is qualified to be the hero that we've been waiting for.
Yeah, the king.
The king. Well, if you enjoyed this conversation, we want to encourage you to be sure to check out the sermon that went along with it. As always, if you have questions or concerns or want to leave us a comment, we love reading those. Feel free to leave those on YouTube or send them in at livingthemessage@moodychurch.org, or you could text them in at 312-682-1888. Be sure to subscribe, like, and leave us a rating. We always appreciate that, and share this podcast with others who you think might enjoy it. We truly hope that you were encouraged, equipped, and enabled to now go and live the message.